Welcome to the Weekly Roar, coming live from the Lion's Den, helping new managers become great leaders and awesome bosses. And now, here's your host, Greg Storch.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Weekly Roar. Thanks for coming back and joining me again today in the Lion's Den for this week's watch party. I just got back this last weekend from Edinburgh, Scotland, where we got to spend this year's Thanksgiving. It was our first time to Scotland, and it was awesome. And in case you're wondering, yes, I tried haggis, and it was actually pretty good. For those of you who celebrate Thanksgiving, I hope you had a wonderful time this year with your family and friends. Man, I cannot believe that we're in December already. If anyone knows where I put this entire year, please let me know because I misplaced it somewhere. Now, today, I'm actually going to talk about the last pivot in my series, Inevitable Change, Making Pivots in Your Leadership. But before we get into all that, let me introduce myself. Some of you already know me, but for those of you who may be jumping into the Lion's Den for the first time, then I'm Greg Storch, and I am the founder of Lion Enterprise, a leadership development and coaching business where I focus on helping organizations create winning cultures. I'm a certified professional coach and a certified leadership speaker and trainer. So last week, I spoke about making the pivot towards changing the impact we have as leaders on our followers, our ability to inspire others to be, do, and have more. I was talking about how to become a transformational leader. And once you start to make that pivot, it can not only change your own life, but it's sure to positively change the lives of those around you. I also shared 5 actions that you can take to start working on making the shift from being just a leader who's been trained in leadership to a leader who transforms. That's last week's recap. And if you weren't able to watch the Weekly Roar last Wednesday, head over to my website at lion-enterprise.com. Check out video number 82 for last week's session in the Lion's Pride Library, where you can also access all of my other videos. The Lion's Pride Library is free, and it's a great way for you to get more of the roar. I mentioned earlier that today is the final pivot from my series, Inevitable Change, Making Pivots in Your Leadership. This is probably the best place to remind you that these are just some of the pivots I've made in my own leadership journey, but this list of pivots isn't the end-all be-all. You may have pivots that you've made or you need to make that I didn't even cover. So what's the best way to describe a pivot? When I first started this series, I spoke about the term pivot as it related to basketball. That's where I first learned the word, when I played basketball starting in elementary school for the Our Lady of Lourdes Falcons. Now, in that context, a pivot is used to describe the motion a basketball player has to take once they stop dribbling the ball, but they want to reposition for a better pass or shot from where they currently stand. A pivot can also be used to describe the point at which a turnaround is centered. And in business, especially for entrepreneurs, the term pivot is commonly used to describe the release of a new product or approach to the market after determining the original or previous product didn't perform as well as expected. They say they've made a pivot in the market. Really, I like all of these references to the word pivot because they all describe the action of taking a new direction while planted in your current position. And that's what this series has been all about. It's to get all of you to just think about where you are now in your leadership and to take a second to just evaluate whether your situation requires a different approach to the way that you've been doing things. One of the keys to a really good leader is their ability to remain flexible and embrace change. And that's what making a pivot requires. You have to be willing to see the need for change in the way that you're leading when it may not be effective anymore. And the new way of leading, the change you make to become a more effective leader, that's the pivot. So there are a lot of you in the Lion's Den that are on a journey. Some of you are still working at jobs or established careers. Maybe some of you are even pursuing your passion. So this last pivot is something that I think will resonate with all of you. Why? Because it's probably the most natural pivot that any one of us can make. Despite that, it's also a pivot that many people fail to make. They fail to see and they fail to execute. They've fallen into the trap of what we call life. They've settled into their comfort zones and they just don't think about it. They just let life happen. So let's start out today by thinking into a question. Ready? Here it is. How do you look at what you currently do for a living? Most people's answers fall into one of three zones. They describe themselves as being in zone 1, having a job, zone 2, having a career, and zone 3, fulfilling a calling. Now, before you guys answer the question I just asked, let me describe these zones a little more. And then I want you to think into them to really see where you might place yourself at this time. So zone 1, you do a job. A long time ago, my dad asked me, Greg, do you know what JOB stands for? Just over broke. I remember that to this day because having a JOB is where your primary goal is to earn a living to support your family. You know, you're punching the clock and give your time to your employer, but as soon as you walk out those doors to go home, your mind's no longer on the job. If you aren't sure this is your mindset, then all you need to do is ask yourself where you're getting your sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. Is it on the job or is it outside of work? If it's from the job, then you aren't really in zone 1. But if you answered yes, that it comes from outside the workplace, then that's a good indication you are in this zone. Now, I want to make 2 points about this zone. First of all, a job, even if it's something you love to do, shouldn't be seen as the end all, but rather a starting point. And a second point I want to make is that a job is only an opportunity with potential to take you to your calling. So that's zone 1. I have a job, but that's all it is. I enjoy what I do, but I don't get my joy in life from it. It just allows me to provide for my family. If that sounds like you right now, then your answer to my question is that you're in zone 1. Zone 2. This zone is where most of us would say they have a career. It's maybe a step further than just having a job, right? If you think you're in this zone, then you probably feel like you're headed in a certain direction, that there's more of an upward trajectory rather than a straight line across the time continuum. There would be a sense of increased skills that you're building and increase in responsibilities over the years as you're building a successful career. Let me give you an example of a job and a career from my own life. When I was 16 years old, I got my first real job working at public supermarkets in Florida. And that's exactly what it was. It was a job. I mean, isn't that what parents always say to their kids when they get old enough to work? You need to get a job. And so we take these jobs and we perform work in exchange for money so we can go out on dates and buy cars and put gas in those cars. It's a means to provide all of these things to us. But the thing is, I didn't draw any satisfaction or fulfillment from working in the grocery store and walking grocery bags out to people's cars for them. No, my satisfaction came from all of the activities outside of the workplace. So that was a job. But then I joined the Navy. I spent decades on an upward trajectory that could be traced with all of my promotions. I mastered skills and assumed greater responsibility, all while earning higher income. That's why I call it my military career. It was just that, a career. So can you see the difference in those two examples between I have a job and I'm pursuing a career? I hope that helped. And that brings us to zone 3. Simply put, this is when you are pursuing your passion in life. It's what we would refer to as our calling in life. There are some of you who feel like you're in this zone now at this point in your life. And I know some of you are. This is the zone where your skills, talents, experience, and traits all merge together, and you develop this strong desire to create and lead and inspire and add value to others. While a career is something you can do, a calling is something you must do. Maybe you haven't quite yet found your calling. Finding your calling is like finding your why, the reason why you're here in the first place. This is the pivot that I'm talking about today, finding your calling, because I believe that everyone has the potential to find their own purpose in life. I think we all want to know and be more than we are right now. But unfortunately, some people lack their belief that they have a purpose. So they don't try to find their why. They just accept their lives. Now that I've described the 3 zones, you can answer my original question. How do you currently look at what you do for a living? If you are in zones 1 or 2, then I've got great news for you, and I'm glad you're watching this video right now. If you're in zone 3, then you can just listen in and maybe pulse check where you're at. Maybe you'll hear something that'll bring you a little closer to your calling. The reason I'm glad you're watching and listening to this video right now is because if you fall into zones 1 and 2, I want to tell you that regardless of where you are in life, whether you're that kid being told to get a job or you've already retired from career, you've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, it's never too early and it's never too late to find your purpose, your calling. Applying to be a member of AARP? Not too late. Filing for Social Security benefits? Still not too late. Still in high school? It's not too early. I think some of you have heard my own story about the day I learned of my calling. I was working in a career. I was a successful corporate executive in the private IT industry, and I was leading contracts in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. For almost 7 years, I successfully rose through the ranks at that company. And over the course of my first 4 years with the company, I promoted 3 times. I was making about $250,000 a year. And as I tell this story to other people, I always tell them I'd achieved the most I had ever achieved, led the largest number of people I'd ever led, and made the most money I'd ever dreamed about. Yet I was the worst version of myself that I had ever been. I was stressed out. I wasn't making any time for my family, and I really didn't enjoy hanging out with friends. I was working long hours, and I was always exhausted. To be honest with you, I'm pretty sure I battled depression during those years. And the stress I was experiencing eventually landed me in the hospital for 3 days. It was after that hospitalization that I started to really think into my unhappiness. And I thought to myself, life is too short to be this unhappy. And that's the day I decided I was going to make a change. Why did I change? Well, a big factor was that I was working in an industry that I had no passion for. And it was really hard to be surrounded by people who were passionate about it. The minute people would speak to me about the network or some new technology, my eyes would just glaze over and I'd fall asleep and start snoring. I had zero interest in any of it. Why did I do it? Well, mainly because of the money, but also in large part of the leadership. I loved leading people and I was good at it. I was making a difference in their lives and it drove me to stay there as long as I did. But I started really thinking about what I was passionate about, and I realized my calling to leadership. And that day, I started developing a plan to leave corporate America to pursue my passion. On September 30th, 2017, I submitted my resignation after setting up Lion Enterprise in April of that same year. Now, my income has decreased significantly as an entrepreneur. It isn't even measurable compared to my executive income. Can it be? Of course, and more. But that isn't my driving factor. I'm now striving to reach my full potential by pursuing my passion for leadership. It's how I make the world better and brighter. That's my story. And the reason why I'm glad my zone 1 and 2 people are here today is that in this pivot, I'm going to share the characteristics of a calling so that you can tune in and start pursuing your passion, so you can answer your calling and begin to make the world better and brighter. Your calling can give you a life filled with passion that motivates you to make a difference. Many of you that I know are on this path already, but others I know are not yet. How will you know it? When it's your calling, you won't have to chase after it. You'll be captured by it. It will chase you. So for those of you who maybe haven't heard the call yet, or those of you who want to be prepared for it when the time comes for you to heed the call, these characteristics will help you to be better prepared to see it and heed it when it finally captures you. All right, so the first thing you need to know is that whatever your calling may be, it was made just for you. It is you. Nobody is ever given a calling that they aren't suited for. Knowing this characteristic is important because now you'll see the link to being self-aware. If your calling matches who you are, then you better know who you are, right? As you're listening for your calling, you can think more into it by answering questions like these. If money was no object and you could do anything you wanted to do in life, what would you do? When people ask you to help them, what do they ask for most often? What activities do you engage in without being prompted? What excites you the most? Or what could you talk about for hours? Having answers to these questions are going to help you become more self-aware, and they'll also help you think more about your calling. Another characteristic of a calling is that it taps into your passion. I mean, think about it. You have to have passion for it, or you're going to fizzle out eventually. Heeding the call is no short order. The road will be long, and so it's through sheer passion for it that will keep you going and going. You know why the Energizer Bunny keeps on going and going and going? Because he's passionate about Duracell batteries. Not sure what you're passionate about? Well, what keeps you up at night? What makes you feel alive? Passion, that's the jet fuel that's going to propel you towards pursuing your calling. It's what's going to give you the boost to keep going, because it's a big driver towards your calling. So you should spend time here thinking about what you're truly passionate about. It should be an all-consuming, burning desire that sets you on fire every time you think about it. Do you know what your passion is already? If so, write it down. Okay, this third characteristic goes back to something I've talked about many times to many people. It's about making the shift from being selfish to selfless. Why? Because what I need you to know is your calling isn't about you. It's about helping others. It's never about the person being called. Instead of thinking of yourself as the center of everything, think of yourself as the conduit through which good things reach others. This is all about living a life of significance by making a difference with others. So, this is another characteristic about your calling. Remember that it isn't about you. The fourth characteristic that I wanted to share with you about your calling is that it's a supersized jumbo magnet that's going to pull you out of your comfort zone. You may get a feeling of being overwhelmed or intimidated, or that what you're called to do is just downright impossible for you to deliver. It's bigger than you. Well, you'll know it's your calling if, despite these feelings, you're still compelled to do it. If your desire to do it is greater than the pull away from everything you're comfortable with, then that's a great sign that it might be your calling in life. The fifth and final characteristic that I wanted to share with you about your calling is that whatever it is, it's the thing that will bring you true fulfillment in life. And this is the one characteristic that gave it all away to me when I found my calling. Nothing in life will bring as much fulfillment as your calling. Not money, not fame, recognition, none of it. Your calling can be looked at as the missing piece to the puzzle of life. The piece that answers, what was it all for? It changes everything. When you're pursuing your passion and heeding your call, you'll often be telling yourself, I was born to do this. Have you ever heard someone tell you that before? That you were born for this? What were they speaking about when they said that? What was it that you were doing when they made that statement to you? Do you know what your calling is already? Or are you still finding your way? If you're still trying to find it, then you may get to a decision point where you either continue doing what you've always done, or you get to make a drastic change and go down a road you haven't gone down before that represents your calling. It's a scary and uncomfortable trail, but if you find it, if you find your calling and you heed the call, you will never regret the hard work that it takes to pursue it. You know, one of my mentors that has helped me most on my leadership journey is John Maxwell. And John Maxwell speaks on this subject of our calling. And when he does talk about it, he describes this time when he was in college. And when he was in college, that's when it helped him to understand himself more. It gave him more self-awareness, and it also helped him mark the path for his own life. So he shares these 3 questions that were asked of him by one of his professors in college that set him on his journey and helped him to discover his calling. So I wanted to share those 3 questions with you too. So here they are. The first one is, what times in life make you sing? What fills your heart? Second question, what times in life make you cry? What breaks your heart? And then the third and final question to answer is, what times in life make you dream? What lifts your heart? If you take a moment to think into those questions, it will help you to become more self-aware. And it'll also help you to set out on your journey towards your calling in life, to finding your why. Your calling will most likely take some time to reveal itself to you. So stay attentive, listen to your feelings, and take time to reflect. Learn from your past and don't discount your dreams. Do these things, and when your moment comes, you'll be prepared to embrace it. Okay, I'm going to do a quick recap here. I just shared 5 characteristics of your calling for your own awareness. So in the event you haven't discovered your calling yet, you'll be ready when it presents itself. The first was that your calling matches who you are, and that's why self-awareness is so important. You got to know who you are. I gave you some questions you could ask yourself that would help you start to think about what your calling might be. Like, what would you do if money weren't an issue? And when people ask for your help, what's the most common thing they ask you to do for them? The second characteristic I mentioned was how your calling is going to tap into your passion. Your calling is something big, and your passion is the fuel that will take you all the way to the end. Without a passion for what you've been called to do, you may quickly find out that it isn't a calling, it's a hobby. Identify your passion by asking yourself, what keeps you up at night? Then I shared a third characteristic that I had to do with changing the focus away from yourself and becoming selfless and realizing that your calling isn't about you, it's about helping others. You aren't the center of it all. You're the conduit in which it passes through. The fourth, your calling is bigger than you. It's going to make you feel uncomfortable and intimidated. It may feel insurmountable and unachievable, but if it's your calling, you'll feel compelled to fulfill it despite how uncomfortable it is. And it's going to stretch you. You're going to want to stretch to complete it. You'll move forward despite the odds because your calling is bigger than you and it's bigger than your fears. And then finally, the fifth characteristic I said was that it's the one thing that will bring true fulfillment to your life. It's that one thing that if you heed the calling, you're sure to live a life without regret. It's that feeling that when you're engaged in your calling, that you were born to do it. Our calling is the gift we give the world while we're still alive. I hope that you'll pursue your calling with passion, and once you find your why, that you work with everything you have to fulfill it. Oh man, there it is, the final pivot in my series. I hope you all enjoyed this series as much as I have. It's been amazing having you all with me this year. So, what's next for the Weekly Roar? To be honest, I'm not exactly sure what comes next, but I do know that I plan to take the last 2 weeks of the year off to spend some time reflecting on this past year and thinking into what comes next in the new year. That means we're going to have 2 more Weekly Roars in 2019, one on December 11th and the last one on December 18th before we roll in to the holidays. Hey, I want to thank all of you, not only for joining me for the Weekly Roar, but also for joining me for the leadership series. I appreciate you more than I can say. Hey, just a friendly reminder before we sign off here, you can help me influence other leaders and help them grow by sharing out the link to the Weekly Roar video that I'm going to post in a new post in the Lion's Den once this watch party is over. Don't forget, the watch party link does not stay active, so don't share that link. It won't stay open for long. Anyway, I'm going to be back here next week, so be on the lookout for my next event notification on Facebook to find out what's in store for the Weekly Roar. All right, everybody, until we meet again, you know what to do. Be powerful, but stay poised, just like a lion. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching the Weekly Roar live event at lionenterprise.com. If you enjoyed this video, please tell others to join us each week here in the Lion's Den. Thanks again, and see you next week.